And we are live. I think we're live and we're live. Welcome back to the Weekly Roundup, December 29th edition. Holy cow, this year ripped by. We keep saying that, but it's true. It's exciting. Let's get into it. I think at the end of the year, one of the conversations I'm finding myself in, and Carol and I were just talking about, off camera here for a second, is you start to take stock on what's happened the last year, what's maybe worked, what hasn't. You start to look at the year in front of you. And to kick us off, I think I wanted to bring up the conversation of like how you feel about that. The idea being, if you look at the past year and you can't like sit with some pride around what you've accomplished, that can be really deflating. And if you look at the year in front of you and you're looking at it from a state of anxiety, fear of the future, that is also a potential issue. And I always find, admittedly for myself, like this week right now, between the 26th and the 30th is like, that's the week where I'm taking that stock in a new way. We've done our planning already months ago for what we're going to do in the next year, but this is the week where I'm like slowed down and start to really feel, okay, what's coming next? And I guess on this ramble and rant, it's the concept that in yoga, we know very well, the only thing that exists is right now anyways. So if you're feeling negative about the past, that leads towards ultimately burnout and depression. But everything that you've experienced is leading you to who you are and where you are right now. So it is only positive because it's created you literally. And anything that hasn't happened yet, that's that leading to anxiety, fear of the future, hasn't happened. And the energetic cost of worrying about it is silly. Now, that's easier said than done, but maybe I'll just start us there, Carol. What do you think? What are you hearing from clients? Yeah.
It makes me think of, when we're evaluating, like, say, an event that we just did or something that, we can look even further back for this whole year. And one of the things one of my clients brought up, the way they look at things is what went well. So WWW, what went well, and even better if. So that's all from a positive place instead of like what I didn't do well. It's like it would be even better if this happened. And so I just sort of think maybe taking stock in that way could be a positive way to think about it moving forward. Yeah, and what we talked about this a little bit before we got on the call, but just this week, I'm finding that my clients are having staffing issues, which is always, I think, like you said, sort of a perpetual thing. We're always trying to make that better. And what would even better if all the staff were on board all the time and knew about all your events and were communicating well, but how do we make that better for the new year? Some of the things we had been talking about were, maybe putting some new employee agreements in place or evaluating, even if maybe you don't have anything in place. Maybe this has been, something that you've never had expectations really set up. So this might be a good time to sort of slow down, think about what would make your staff better and write those expectations down. So it's just where I thought I'd start today.
Yeah, I think, staffing, of the top three things that yoga studios and yoga businesses come to us with in terms of like problems, it's been the same thing forever. The order at which they appear seems to change. So my words, not theirs, is lead gen. Like I need more people in the doors. Retention is what people say, but what they actually mean is sales, in my opinion, because they're talking about initial retention, like the upfront sale, and then staff. Those are the three major hiccups. And the truth is, if you solve those three things, you will have a successful studio, full stop. There's more to it that you can do than that to amplify more, but like that's the equation in the simplest form. What you're making me think of to sort of tie these things together, because staff's such a good piece of this puzzle, there is an energetic cost to worry or concern about things. And hence, like, if you can stay positive, like you're saying, like evaluate, learn from what's happened, grow from that, but don't let it create concern. When we're looking at it would be better if situation, then you can identify, what are the steps to make it better, but approaching that from a positive, optimistic angle, I think is empowering, because you're going to spend energy to think about the negative things, or you're going to spend energy to implement the positive things. Either way, you're going to spend that energy. So like, it's a waste of time worrying about the negative things. It's a waste of energy, basically. That can be reallotted over here. Again, easier said than done. One of the character traits that comes up across multiple studies of highly successful entrepreneurs is optimism. And like almost like an egotistical, ridiculous level of optimism. They just like assume things are gonna work out for themselves. And that character trait is hyper prevalent. It's in the vast, like high 90 percentile of what you'd consider a successful entrepreneur. So I always find that interesting because
it kind of makes me laugh because I'm thinking back whenever we opened our studio and I was like, I never had a doubt that we were going to be successful, you know? And I'm like, I was just really young and stupid.
yeah,
There's part of it, you know? And I didn't realize how hard it would be, but we, you know, persevered. And of course it was super successful until we needed some help, you know, and we knew again, we're going to make these changes and it's going to be better. So yeah, there is something to that. It's kind of funny thinking about, you know, my 25-year-old self being really
yeah,
optimistic and
yeah. I
sure.
mean, it's the ignorance is bliss element of things to some extent, but I feel like having the grit to stay the course is often touted as some sort of like an intrinsic strength value that someone has to develop or that somebody has. But I think that actually it's better that it comes from just like a blind optimistic belief. You know, like it's not because you're fighting and swimming upstream. It's because you're like, this is gonna work out, you know, like
Yeah.
you know, just gonna keep moving forward. So
Yeah.
so let's jump in on staff. You mentioned you know, maybe redefining the relationship or getting like a better, I guess, contract or agreement put in place. I think the new year is an interesting time for that because obviously a studio is often very busy, but at the same time, I mean, whatever, January 1st is just an arbitrary date that we decide that there's some sort of transition around. But at the same time, there is like a cultural, energetic element to that. So it is also kind of like a fresh beginning moment where I feel like there is a certain level of acceptance for you to say, like, okay, for this year, these are some shifts and changes that we need to make. So maybe it is a good time, despite the busyness, to approach that with your team. What are your thoughts on that, Carolyn? Like, what would you consider putting in that agreement?
Well, let's see, what have we've been just talking about because there are some studio owners that I know have just never even set expectations other than you're going to come in, you're going to teach a class and, you know, leave. And so a lot of the studios that are just now finding themselves with support staff like desk people, or they want to kind of rearrange maybe like how they have managers, part-time, full-time, whatever. So it is sort of, it does take a bit of thought and defining the roles that you want and the expectations. But at the very basic level, you know, even just for teachers, I think, you know, educating them on, look, the owner's goal is to bring more people in. The teacher's goal, you know, if you're looking at, you know, really what we want them to do is to get people to come back in the doors. So how do we define that in an agreement? You know,
Mm-hmm.
how do we make sure that they know here are the ways you can do that? Or, you know, whether it's like connecting with the students. I mean, that was one thing that we were really big on. Like you are standing, you are present during the entrance of everyone coming in, during check-in, you're present and aware as people are leaving. You know, just there, some of these things aren't totally tangible. We're trying to figure out how to put that into words and how do we put these expectations into place. The other part of this is again the communication part, where if you're having teachers that are only teaching once a week or once every 2 weeks, and they are a bit disconnected from the team in a way. Like, how do we pull those people in? Because I feel like that's been a frustration that I've noticed with some of my
Mm,
clients. Um, so I think you as the owner need to make sure there's a really clear way to communicate, on a weekly, daily basis, when they know where to go to get that communication. And then how do we make sure that they're actually paying attention? That's always the concern, or how do we do that? So anyway, I'm kind of rambling here, but yeah, how do we put this in an agreement is the challenge.
yeah, I think I mean, obviously, there's like the legal contractual agreement element of things, which we recommend going to Corey and Conscious Counsel or Law is Fun and just getting like your own customized actual agreement written for you. And it's really just from the perspective that we share with them that like clarity ultimately wins. So it's not about the legality because of the legality. It's about it being an official document and you both agreeing and signing. And that does change behavior in people, basically. The number of times when we see, because this would be the antithesis of that, right? When you don't have something in place and then there is a hiccup with an employee or even subcontractor or whatever, how quickly that person will go to, well, we don't have any agreement. Like, it doesn't say that in my contract. Like that
Mhm.
sort of shit comes up almost right away. So just eliminate that possibility. But then also for yourself, it's a source of truth where you're like, I have set a clear expectation with this person as per this contract. So if I'm asking them to do something else, you have to gut check and be like, wait, is this represented in the contract? No, then I need to update it. And it kind of holds yourself accountable too in a positive way. Practically speaking, I think that, there can just be a general expectations appendix to an agreement that can change over time and be updated and just resent out, and that can be written in there. But more practically speaking, when you were saying, Carol, that like the objective of a teacher is to get people to want to come back again, which I totally agree with. I think that there's benefit in the clarity with your team around hyping them up around like a mantra, basically. Like just that could be your one mantra or your one like outcome, because everything else sort of shakes out from there. If you want me to make sure that I respond in a Slack channel or read the email or whatever before I teach, saying that I have to do that because it's my job is not motivating for a lot of people. But if you really get me believing that like I'm trying to save people's lives by helping them come back to another class and find a habitual yoga practice, therefore by extension, I'm empowered more to do that if I understand what's going on in the studio and what's being communicated to the students in the upcoming events or whatever else, then like I have to then consume that stuff. And it's more of that like deeper why factor. Um, yeah, I think that the yoga world, I find the studio owners often assume that yoga teachers are intrinsically motivated to do a good job. And no shade on them, but that's not always the case, basically. Not that they're doing a bad job, but it's like that the type of motivation that the owner is looking for versus what, actually is motivating the teacher are incongruent sometimes. So you do have to sort of hype them up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It makes me also think, because one of the owners I was speaking with today was like, you know, they're also surprised that the teachers weren't wanting to do like continuing education or like it's like, well, yeah, no, sometimes they're not motivated. Maybe they've done one teacher training and they're kind of set in their ways, and that's what they do. So if you want to have go beyond that, or move up in a pay scale, maybe that is something you have to actually motivate them to do, or set an expectation for that. So it's just kind of interesting. Yeah, that
Yeah.
um,
That's a really curious one because that's a great example of like you would assume if you're providing additional education and training to hone your craft and get better as a yoga teacher, and it doesn't cost them anything, that they would want to
mhm.
participate. But you're right, I see that a lot where they're like, "No, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like I have teaching my class," which might be an indicator of a lot of other things. But um, I think that there's also a balance point between how you actually contractually articulate something and set expectations, inclusive of what you're suggesting, like if you have a tiered performance-based pay structure, which we recommend, then like the only way to get the top tier is participating in a certain way. And one of the elements would be you have to continue your education and knowledge as a yoga teacher. So that's sort of like, I guess, the forceful way to do it, for lack of a better way to say it. Like they have to do it to get XYZ. But then I feel like there's also an element that is undervalued in leadership in the yoga world where certain things should just be non-negotiable. Because in that structure, you're like, I can only get paid more if I do my continuing education. But if I don't want to, and I just accept I'm not going to get paid more, I just won't do it, then what? So as opposed to theoretically at the moment of hire, if you're like, hey, like at this cadence, we do continuing education.
Yeah.
Period. That's just what we do. Like it's not a negotiable thing. It's not a question thing. I guess this is a long-winded way of saying it seems that there's often some friction from leadership to especially yoga teachers, but anyone working in a yoga studio, that accidentally happens because things are posed as a question or as something that has like an option of participation. Communication would be a good one. If you work for any business, there's going to be a communication line between that business and you under their employ, even if you're a contractor. Like that's a normal world thing in all work, period. So how would it even be a question to say to your team, this is how we communicate, and there's this expectation of communicating back? Yeah, so it's almost like it's just an attitude that has to be embodied. We do it like this because this.
Yeah, well, it goes back to also the studio owner having like this sense of like they're doing me a favor by teaching, instead of this is an employee employer, this is a real true business that I'm running here. So because there are a lot of people I think that start and they're just, well, that's where the teachers are kind of running the show because they decide, well, this is when I can teach. And I'm doing you a favor by coming in. And that attitude or that mindset of the owner really has to be switched.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that, yeah, that's such a strange thing in the industry the last years that's happened. More prevalent in certain markets than others. But I mean, I suppose a teacher could teach online, and teachers try to make the debate that like they can make their own following or whatever. But like they see the people who have succeeded at that statistically. As a yoga teacher, the likelihood of you building up your own following and being able to outperform in revenue than working, at a yoga studio is statistically very low. It's actually way harder. It's way the fuck more work. And I think teachers, don't notice that. The point being, you're doing them a favor by having the studio. You've put up all the risk, you've created the environment, you've got all the clients in the door. Like if you're doing your job properly as an owner, there is no dynamic of them doing you a favor, really. It's not to say that there's no like human flexibility around the work situation, but just, changing that attitude, to your point, Carol, I think is a necessary starting point for a lot of owners.
It's like sometimes I can see that in coaching, like the owner starts to like, no, I am providing, you can see that switch, you can see that fire almost lit underneath them, over time when it's like, yes, you're steering the ship, you took on the risk, and you tell them, you're gonna, tell them what the expectations are. So it's like almost you can feel them getting fired up and figuring it out along the way, which is a good thing. So
I think also, one of the things on the other side of this, like there's the clarity of the agreement, there's like a contractual agreement, there's your leadership style around, actually being the leader first off and having that attitude. Because what we're saying is an attitude of strength, but it doesn't mean to like fight against your employees. You're not against them. You're on the same team. That's the whole point. So just, ground yourself there, but then lead them in a positive way forward. And don't be scared to lead from a place of strength where you kind of stand your ground around expectations. But then on the other side of this too is then make your work environment awesome. Like just make it so fun and awesome to work with you that it like things are easy. I think there's a lot of studios we have been in, and especially when we go on the ground, like when Carol or Terry goes to a sales training, I know that like Carol, you pick up on this immediately. You have a great sense of this, where it's like you can see where there's a friction in the team in their participation, not because they couldn't do the thing, but because they are viewing their job as a job. Like they have to get reconnected to the bigger purpose of the whole studio and also what they're doing there. Even if that's just that front desk person who's like the college student working part-time, that's it. They're not even a teacher. There's a deeper impact motivator that exists in a studio that everyone benefits from getting connected to. But part of that too is the pay. An interesting conversation right now, because I think in most of Western culture, there's a sense of things being tighter financially and expenses going up and inflation and all these, sort of scary things in the news or whatever. People are accidentally like allowing that to affect them. But that being said, it just means if I can work for someone as a teacher and it's fun to teach there and it's easier for me to teach there than somewhere else, and it's really clear on what my performance KPIs are going to be, and I'm positively reinforced and I'm paid well, then that's the business that's going to aggregate the best people. So especially if you're in a market where you have subcontractor teachers who are bouncing around town, like just beat them, basically. I read a stat recently that was fascinating, not about the yoga industry. It was talking more about corporate and SaaS. But right now, if someone pays 25% more than average market, they get the people who are on average 2 times better than the average market employee in the same position. So if you think about it that way, the trade you're making is really good. That like, yeah, you're paying 25% higher, but you get someone who's twice as good, is 100% better. That's a 75% delta, whatever the numbers aside, like worth it, Does that work with yoga teachers and studio employees? I don't know, but it is an interesting thought that there's a sensitivity in the market to that. And there's people who are looking for the best opportunity, best place to be.
Yeah. It makes me think of like, that motivator. Money isn't always the motivator for yoga teachers, it seems like. So I think you're right. I love what you're saying about, make it a great place to work, make it fun to be there, make it, give them that positive reinforcement. And you don't have to necessarily pay them 25% more. You need to give them a little sugar. So
give them the sugar. Maybe it's like, can you make working with you 25% better than working somewhere else? It doesn't necessarily have to be pay. Although, I think pay is not a motivator, but on the other hand, the number one thing when we poll teachers and employees at yoga studios around, what would make their life better, if there's 1 or 2 things that come up all the time, pay is one of them. I wouldn't say that it's hyper prevalent or anything, but there's just the brass tacks for people of like, I love doing this, but I need to make money. So, sure. But I think pay could be other environmental things. Give them a +1. Like if they have a membership and they have a +1 and they get a good discount on retail, things like that. Retail is a good example. You mean 10% off retail? I worked at a business way, way back in the day. They're like, oh, because you work here, you get 10% off. I'm like, you guys do more than that in your regular sales. Like, who gives a shit about 10% off? You would give 10% off to anyone on the street. We have a 200% markup. Give me 40% off. That sounds good.
Right.
Yeah. Anyways. Um, well, changing gears a little bit, but as an extension of this, actually, in some way, from the commentary of like the belief that teachers have around the ability to build their own business, but not maybe realizing the effort required for that. I was reading an article on Medium, and it was talking about sort of like these big keynote speakers. And then it sent me down a rabbit hole. But long story short, whenever you discover someone that like you see them speak on stage and you're like, wow, that person's really incredible, or there's someone online that you follow, or someone has like a book or especially a series of books that you have, like think about like a Simon Sinek. He would check all of these boxes: large online following, excellent keynote speaker, very famous, TED Talks, multiple books out there, like has actually influenced entire industry in general. And everyone, I say Simon Sinek, basically everyone knows who I'm talking about, and the whole like starts with why concept. Simon Sinek wasn't discovered. And that was the point of like partial point of this article that I was thinking about too, that like going into the next year and we're looking at marketing, advertising, building your business, how to get your name out there. No one is discovered. You don't just like randomly, oh my gosh, I discovered this thing, and then they blow up. Everyone, the Simon Sineks out there, it's because they put out a shit ton of content. There's other elements to it, of course, the charisma, the clarity of their message, the specificity, what they're for or against. That's the fine tuning. But in the end, it comes down to the simplicity of like ultra high volume, repetitious, clear content that they put out there, and it's built up. If you look at the career of a Simon Sinek or a few other people I follow, they appear all of a sudden. They just like his TED Talk was the thing that I think really blew him up. But prior to that TED Talk, he spent 2 decades like researching and teaching and building this whole philosophy so he didn't just appear. He wasn't discovered by TED all of a sudden and blow up. He blew up because that was the final payout of 2 decades of effort and knowledge accumulation and putting stuff out there and putting content out there. So being discovered is a myth. That would be my point.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to any of these like overnight successes. That's not really a thing. They've been nose to the grindstone for a long time. And in this case with them, content is, it takes a lot of work. It's a long time to be doing, 20 years of content or the message. It's a long time. So it's not overnight, and they're not just discovered, like you said. So
yeah,
I don't know.
I think content production too, content is the word. Like modern marketing is about content curation, in my opinion. Everything else is distribution of the content, but there's other benefits to it that are undervalued, or like the perspective is missed, I think, when you look at it from the perspective of single location brick and mortar yoga studio. For example, your ability to articulate a point, your ability to speak in a motivating and inspiring way, your ability to differentiate yourself through the finer details, your ability to communicate how deep of an understanding you have on the problems that your product, your yoga classes really solve. Those are the things that set you apart. Those are the things that anchor people to you. Those are the things that really sell you, and the yogis of our time, the famous ones at least, did this extremely well. For all of his assholery, Bikram was an insanely good marketer in this way. Patabi Joyce, very good marketer in this way. Iyengar, very good marketer in this exact way. Yogananda, very good marketer in this way. They put out a lot of content. They had a few threads that they stuck to. They had their turns of phrase that got seared into people's brains. And I don't know, that was obviously they back it up with their actual products, but in the end, that was really what built them up in a big way in our culture, at least. So I think that producing content goes beyond getting yourself out there. It's also part of your entrepreneurial processing to figure out what works and what doesn't, and to figure out how to improve your own communication and articulation of what it is that you're doing. Because I mean, that's why every yoga site out there says yoga for everybody, because they're like, that sounds cool. Like they don't have any other idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you ask it like, what's great about your yoga class? Ask your average teacher out there. I mean, it's good for stress reduction. You feel good afterwards. Mental health. That's all true. But there's no better way to say that. You know, what specifically is it good for? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, as far as like thinking from a brick and mortar yoga studio, I think people are going online and they want to see the personality of the studio a bit
Mm-hmm.
too. So I think this came up at the summit a bit where there's an owner there that was like, I used to overthink all of the content I was putting out, and it wasn't perfect, so I wouldn't put it out there. And it's like now they're just like, you know what? I'm going to do this video and I'm going to put it out there no matter what. And it's the volume, which is important, like we we're saying, but also like if you mess up, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's like, again, it just sort of, we want to get across to the viewer, what's the vibe of the studio? Do we
Mm-hmm.
like the look, the feel, the message? So I think getting over the overthinking could be a big part of that for 2024. Just put stuff out there.
Put it out there. Yeah, put it out, put yourself out there. It's such an important point, Carol. I totally agree. Because I feel like certainly there's a fear element that people have of putting themselves out there. But if you really unpack what that is for the majority of people, myself included, even at this point, and look, I've put all sorts of random shit out there. You can find YouTube videos of me saying all sorts of dumb crap. It's not even true anymore, but it really is fear of judgment. It's like other people judging you. And in this way, it is part of your yoga entrepreneurial journey too, because if you really fearlessly put stuff out and you don't really care about judgment of other people, and it's part of your own process and part of your own magnetism of attracting the correct people towards you, if you can get to that place, then it does get easier, and it is a good self-development element of things. But volume aside, the other thing you mentioned too about the imperfection of it, when you put something out, let's say you make a video and you post it on Instagram Reels, it's very egotistical actually to be worried about it not being good enough, because no one's going to see it. Like people are going to see it, but like 1,000 people, 2,000, if you hit it really well for most yoga studios, 10,000, it's unlikely, because of the nature of the business and the content, you're going to get that million view thing. And that's not even really the objective, because you probably don't have a million people even in your market that you can service, right? So the imperfection is irrelevant versus the volume, and you can reproduce the same conceptual piece of content multiple times. In fact, that is a technique that I'd recommend. If you find one point that you're trying to make, like why it's important to have mobile hamstrings, you don't make one video on that. Make 50 videos about that exact same thing. Say them in different ways, find a different angle, explain a different detail. That's how you become known for something. I always think of, Carol, do you know the knees over toes guy?
I don't think so.
He's hadn't come on your
Doesn't
radar yet.
sound,
Now that I've said it, I'm sure the AI
yeah,
listening
yeah.
to us will feed
My
that
phone
to
will
your,
show me later.
yeah, your TikTok will absolutely feed you knees over toes guy now. I bet you if you turn it on right now, it comes on. Whatever. There's this guy, and his brand is called Knees Over Toes, and it's brilliant, because basically in the old school workout regime of things and training, you're taught to not let your knees go past your toes. Yogis still say this actually in yoga asana practice. It's bullshit. It's not true. And so he named himself Knees Over Toes guy and does all these training things where he does put his knees over his toes. And he's like fixed his knees and avoided surgeries and made them stronger. And all these professional athletes train with him now, and they're all stronger than ever. And he's, 47 or something and can still dunk. Like he has this crazy vert and stuff like that. But by doing these really interesting exercises where your knees do go over your toes to like strengthen the micro muscles around it. Anyways, he's a good example of just his whole existence is by talking about this one thing, which is knees going past the toes. Like now he has more than that, but to start, that was it. He had one message, like work out and do these things in this way. That's it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
whole career based off of one thing.
Well, marketing is that exercise of repetition, right? So, like, it's not surprising at all that if you want to start out and be strong, say the same thing a few times. I think I definitely got caught up in that an owner. Like, I felt like I needed new content all the time, but it's like repurposing or saying something similar in a different way is not bad at all. Like, just keep putting it out there.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, so what there's all the old sayings that I don't even know how much truth is in them, but like someone has to hear something 7 times before they consider it, or blah blah blah, that sort of stuff. There was a Google study. On average, it took 34 impressions of seeing a pair of socks before someone bought it. So like people just need to get a message multiple times. So even if the same person hears you say the same subject matter multiple times, it's still not negative. You still want that. We want repetition. We want cycles. It's interesting in the larger scheme of marketing, some of the things that are changing in this next year that I see. This is semi-prediction, it's already happening. Like the TikTokification of things has really shifted a lot of the platforms. And we're going to see sort of like a full circle situation where Facebook circa 2010, if you knew what you were doing, you could organically really get high impact reach in a local market. That's coming back. They're going to lean back into that concept. The asterisk this time will be the algorithms are much more intelligent because they're all machine learning AI run. So it comes down to the content itself and the quality of that content. But when we say quality, it's quality from audience interaction that matters. None of this is new. It's going to go further in that direction. The other thing that we're seeing is influencers and influencer marketing is dying extremely fast. Like people are struggling to grow in that way, and the platforms are repositioning themselves. TikTok with TikTok Shop, for example, and its creator fund. And then Meta and Instagram are doing this as well. They're inserting themselves in between, and they're going to make it their contractual agreement. For example, if I hired Carol to post a video for me about my business, if you were being paid, you would have to put hashtag ads or sponsored on it. That's already in place. And then because that exists, they'll organically suppress it. And it's their way of making sure they get a piece of the pie. So what that creates is a market shift and opportunity, even for a small business, where internally created content that is legitimately organic internal content now has more weight because it will theoretically be promoted better, especially if it's good. So, and like a big company, they're not going to hire out like social media marketing agencies, other than the top 10% that are the best in the world. They're all dead. That's a terrible business to be in right now. And influencers, as they have previously been, that's dead too. What'll happen now is they're going to internalize those teams. Anyone who's got any real money will hire internal in the company to produce it for this exact reason. If you look at a yoga studio, you probably don't even need to hire for it. Like you have unlimited content. It's you and like a couple of your people and just getting the cycle of producing it. So I don't know. I see it as an opportunity for small business in a new way, where you're paying in your time and energy, but it's, even just a year ago, I would have sat on here and told you run paid ads. It's just you'll get way more traction that way. I would still run paid ads, absolutely, but organic content in the next year, I think, surges in a bigger way than ever.
Very cool.
Like,
Sounds good. Huh. Yeah, I'm just taking that in.
Maybe to finalize this thought, marketing for 2024, we've started this conversation today. Like, there's three things that every owner comes to us with: retention, which I think is actually sales. Well, that's a trainable skill. That's a system you can put in place. It's trainable. You can hire Carol to come to your studio. She will train your team and they'll be able to do that. Then there is, and there's some automations to build and stuff there too, whatever. Then there is staff. Well, that's really something that comes from your leadership, like we talked about, the agreement and the clarity being put in place, and then you really sticking to your guns on that. So it's something that is a continual effort and attitude and mentality, I think, that has to happen. And if necessary, maybe a temporary moment of like reiteration, saying like, hey guys, this is now how things work. But then the third one, get people in the doors. How do I get more people into my studio? Everyone wants that, but I think that the average yoga studio, if we really look at it, doesn't understand at the cost of what's necessary to achieve that actually. Because it, just like the other two categories, requires a continual effort and optimization over time, and is worth it, because if you double your leads, you double your business. You see 50 people a month coming in for a first visit in your studio. If we get 100 in, your business will do better, like, period. It's pretty easy. But I think that 2024 is a year where we're going to see that becomes more necessary. The market's consolidating, and the consumer base, what we're seeing across sort of the trends in the market, has shifted. We've been talking about this for a while. Carol, I'll be curious on your feeling on this too. By the time someone gets to your studio, like, so many other things have happened. If you just organic walk in and try a yoga class, that's not a thing. Not really, like, not like it used to be. So we're seeing retention and sales rates go up organically across the board, but the average first visits in most markets is down, actually. And I think that it just highlights that the consumer base, when they are looking at you now, like, you need to have stuff going out there. They need to be able to run into something that's compelling. They need to have a reason to come in to you. It's not a laziness. It's a non-willingness to waste time or money kind of thing. And just saying like, hey, buy this intro, that's not it. That's not compelling. It's more than that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, what comes to my mind is like, if you can if they can picture themselves there, with the content that you put out, whether it's like just an intro of how the walkthrough of the studio and some testimonials, and like, this is the event that, you're right. I mean, people are looking at these for a while before they decide to take action. And the more comfortable they are before they even walk in the door, I think the better. I was just sort of thinking about how I was trying to find a new hairstylist for my son, and I went to their website, and it was like they had an intro from the owners. They had a walkthrough of the space. It was like I was like, okay, yes, I can. I had that experience myself looking for a new place to go. So this is maybe across a lot of different businesses, but I I don't know. We knew the stylist name. We knew that I could go to their Instagram and see all the things that they've done. Like, I did a lot of research, So
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the same way that's how people go into yoga studios. And, if they like you, then they'll come in the door, but you have to put that content out there. So
It's such a good point, and that shows like the ease of when someone is in that category, like you were in that 3% that is in an active state of looking to purchase. Like, you were like looking to commit and buy right now.
mm-hmm.
If you don't have all the stuff you just described in place, then guess what happens? They fucking go somewhere else. that does.
Or I would have been really hesitant. I would have been like, I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe I'll wait another couple of weeks. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
I'm the researcher. I have to do all that before. So
Mhm.
yeah, I definitely would have waited and probably not taken any action had all that not been there.
Or that's the scenario where then you find yourself, because you don't trust the result of things, then you start doing other things. You're like, well, I want a discount. Like,
Yeah.
do you have like a trial offer? Like then that is there a first time free? Like
Yeah.
that stuff is an indicator of people's fear of not getting what they really want because it's not clear for them the value that you're offering. So, I went family, as you guys know, I live in Mexico. Some family was on the other coast. So we went to the other coast into the Caribbean, and stayed there for a few days before Christmas. And I like fishing. I hadn't fished in the Caribbean. So I wanted to go fishing. There's a bunch of fishing outfits, but long story short, there was a guy at the hotel selling excursions. And it was just so much more convenient for me to go to him and book it, even though it was like $10 more a person or something. Like, didn't really matter, but that's what I did. But it was funny because I tried to get this clarity from him. Like, I was actually talking to the person even. He's like showing me this brochure and we might catch this or that. I'm like, yeah, yeah. But like, what are the water temperatures? What are you catching now this week? How big is the boat? What exactly is included? He's like, yeah, there's drinks on the boat. I'm like, cool. But like my 13-year-old son is coming and he doesn't drink Coca-Cola. So like, is there water on the boat? Is there juice? Can I get a beer? Like, you know, what, what's going on with that? And then he's like, oh, we have the best gear. They always say that in fishing outfits. And I'm like, what brand is it? He didn't know. He's like, oh, I don't know. He just knew to say we have the best gear. I'm like,
Best, yeah.
do you have casting rods too? Like if we see a bait ball of fish, can I get a rod and tie my own lure on and cast? Because I know how to fish. I don't need you to hook the fish up and pass me the rod. And he goes, oh, I'm not really sure. Long story short, we went with him anyways. And it was fun to be on the water. We caught a stupidly big fish, which was exciting, but it was simultaneously one of the worst fishing experiences I've had, mostly out of my bitterness of like asking these questions, not getting clarity, still paying too much money to go out fishing, and then like, yeah, all the things I asked not being there, sort
Yeah.
of thing. So this is a long-winded way of saying, also, I was debating on price with this guy and like talked him down and got a deal. Didn't have a positive experience, still felt like I overpaid. So I would not give them a positive rating or recommend the company to somebody else. So there's like a buyer's remorse element, which would have all completely not happened if I had just had clarity up front in the expectation of what it was. Even if it was the same trip, but I knew that was the trip I was going into, I would be like, well, you told me. Like, so hence going to the website and having that content there and that easy flow for everyone to check you out. Yeah. Content, communication, it all comes back to the same thing. Final thought on this. Why else should you produce content for marketing? The thing that ties together some of our conversation today, because it matters for your team. If your business, you personally, yes, but also if your business is the source of authority in the local market on specific subject matter and putting content out, and your team sees that builds their connection to you, their knowledge base, their pride of the business as well. So from a leadership, staff management standpoint, I think that is also more beneficial than people realize. Okay. Final thoughts, Carol?
Happy New Year. Take it all in, stay positive. I think keep that positive slant. It's always going to serve you better than that negative worry, right? So
I agree. I totally agree. Positivity 2024 is going to be a big year for the yoga industry. I would predict that the total yoga industry value grows by another 25 or 30%. It's going to be bigger than people think. The opportunity is there. It's always been there in the yoga world, but like it's here in a new way more than we've ever seen before, where everything is lining up. You guys have heard me talking about this for a while. We have more people in an age bracket of time plus money than ever before in history in Western culture, who are looking to improve and work on themselves personally, who might not be able to participate in high impact exercise, for example, and want something that's more deep on like a mental, emotional level as well. And on the other side of the sort of age spectrum bracket, we have a younger group of people who we don't have to explain what yoga is, why it's beneficial, are way more self-aware of their mental health than ever before. I mean, everything's lining up for yoga to really like go in a whole nother powerful way. And from a yoga studio standpoint, people have a unique reiterated understanding of the value of what a studio offers post-COVID, but also just in general, I think there's large cultural conversation on the relevance and impact of third spaces. That is what a yoga studio is. So everything leads to yoga studios doing well if you just lean into it and have that optimism and obviously do the work too, but it's there. It's there for you to grab. Cool. All right. Happy New Year, my friends. Do some yoga, get some relaxation, hit January hard. If you haven't signed up for one-on-one coaching yet for next year, there are two, I think we had one that just sold. There are two coaching spots left. That's it. So if you're thinking about it, now's the time. If you're thinking, yeah, but it's busy in January, I don't need coaching then. Sorry, wrong. It's just like, you don't market when you're slow to get busy. You market when you're busy so you never get slow. You don't hire a coach when you have a problem. You hire a coach when you have flow happening so that you can capitalize on it so that you never end up having a problem. And having that coach in your corner, someone like Carol or Vicky, is the single most impactful investment that you can make in your yoga business, period. It's the only one that we've seen any studio make that has immediate return on investment, and as a percentage of return on investment, the highest ROI. Our top studios in 2023, I'll be putting a little report out on this, 100x investment on coaching, which is like an insane number to even look at. But yeah, it works. So 2 spots left. If you're interested, just drop a comment down below or book a free coaching call and we'll talk to you about how it all works. Good for now.